So Waves has released a plugin called Curves Equator, which they've deemed as a resonant suppressor, helping to unmask frequencies in your mix or sound source. It reminds me a lot of Soothe 2, which I would use to get rid of unwanted frequencies or resonant frequencies in my mix that I felt like was clouding things up. It also reminds me of a plugin called Track Spacer, which I would use to get competing sounds out of the way each other, which I'll explain a little bit later. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you this plugin in and out. I'm gonna break it down, kind of show you what it sounds like, but also show you the back end of it and help you to understand what this thing is all about. Now, I'll be honest and let you know that Waves is sponsoring this video. They showed me the plugin and I was actually pretty impressed by it and felt like it could add some value to your workflow or just in general to anyone looking for something to help them when it comes to unmasking frequencies and that nature. But I want you at the end of this video to draw your own conclusions. All I'm going to do is break the plugin down, show you what it sounds like, show you how it works, show you how it could possibly be added to your workflow, and go from there. Draw your own conclusions and make your own decision after watching this. Now, on to the plugin. Let me show you this plugin. Okay, so this is Curves Equator. And what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to put this on my entire mix. So I'm gonna put this plugin on my mix bus. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use it in its most bare form. I'm just gonna take this plugin, I'm gonna bring down the threshold and let it start to give me some of that resonant suppression. One thing I need you to keep in mind, when you see this line right here, I want you to look at this equator line like the threshold. It is the threshold. When you look at this line, look at it like anything that passes the threshold gets processing or gets more processing as it crosses more over the threshold. So keep in mind, this line, the equator line, is the threshold, okay? So let's just use this plugin in its barest form. I'm not gonna mess with any parameters, only one, and that's adding more of the threshold or bringing down the equator line, and let's see what it sounds like. I want you to pay attention to the sound of the vocals and just the clarity of them. This track is completely unmixed, so keep that in mind.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time, keep me saying, whoa. Learning every line, no complaining, no. I'm walking by your side, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time. Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time.
So off rip, I immediately start to notice the clarity on the vocals. I noticed that the clap has more impact. Things just feel like just a lot more clear, and I just can hear things a lot better that I wasn't hearing as much when it came to like the mid-range and the upper mids and things of that nature. It really helped to just kind of clean things up with maintaining that volume that I previously had. Really, really cool, and that's in its barest form. Now, say for instance, I'm saying to myself, well, you know, I really don't want my low end to be or to have as much processing as it did when I had it engaged. Well, with that, now I have a little bit more control, or I have control over how much processing is happening to specific ranges. I can literally alter the curve of the equator line to attack frequencies or ranges that I want more processing or less processing. Let me show you. So if I go right here to this shape parameter, basically as I turn this shape parameter up, you're seeing the curve physically change. Now, what is this saying, or what does this mean as this curve has less happening or less processing, or didn't go down as much in the low end, but it went down more on the top end? What's happening is this shape that you're seeing right now is, it's going to react to the upper side of the actual frequency spectrum quicker now, or more, being that before it was flat, like so, things weren't crossing that threshold at this particular range right here as much as things crossing this threshold more now that we've turned down the threshold. So this is why I was trying to burn in your head about this line being a threshold line in your head. If you see that this line is lower or more down in the actual GUI, then let that be a note to yourself that this is where the threshold is lying. Anything that passes above that is going to get more processing as it passes that line. So now that I've changed the curve and made the curve more or adding more of a threshold to come down on this particular side. Now let's listen to what that sounds like as I pull it down in unison. So I'm going to put this back to its unison function or status as far as the actual threshold of the equator with this new shape. And let's listen to that same kind of processing now with this equator line giving more precedent to the top end of the actual mix, mid-range and top end. Without first.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa, I'm learning every line. No complaining. No, I'm walking by your side. Keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa.
So it's helping to unmask even more frequencies that I was hearing in that mid-range and upper mids and things of that nature. Now that I've changed the shape of the actual curve, now I'm kind of honing in or deciding and making a decision for myself if I want more processing or hear more problems in specific ranges, etc. It gets even deeper than that, but I just wanted to show you that moment and just that sound for face value as far as the sonics of everything. Now, what I'm gonna do is, and obviously you could use this on individual elements, which I think is the best case scenario for it, but I'm gonna show you the plugin in and out. I'm gonna go through all the parameters. I'm gonna let you hear what they sound like and give you a better understanding of the plugin and some ideas workflow wise that I think you could use it for. Please stick around for that track spacer kind of style idea, because I think that is a game changer that can help a lot of people as far as kind of getting things out the way and competing frequencies that's clashing with your instruments and your vocals and things of that nature. Let's get to it. Okay, so I'm gonna quote unquote zero this out or go back to its factory default. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start going through each of the parameters. So first and foremost, let's look at the sensitivity. So what the sensitivity is deciding is, to me personally, it's the difference between a more aggressive sound with the processing and a more gentle or smoother sound with the processing. When I go to a higher sensitivity, I feel like I'm getting a process that feels a little sharper. It feels more aggressive. I can hear that processing happening versus a lower sensitivity. I feel like it's way more gentle and more subtle in its sound. To me, it feels a little bit more natural on the lower side. Let me let you hear what it sounds like. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring this equator line down some more so I can exaggerate things a bit, and I'm going to increase and decrease the sensitivity. Take a listen to the characteristics of what the sensitivity sounds like.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa, I'm learning every line. No complaining. No, I'm walking by your side. Keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time.
So as I listen to it, my opinion is that when it has less sensitivity, it feels a lot more natural and musical to me. When it's on a very hard sensitivity, I feel like it's very aggressive, and I notice those changes. Now, you can find your blend in between the two if you want more processing or less processing, but for me personally, I'm a big fan of just having it just to a lower sensitivity so it feels more natural for the style of music that I make. But maybe for your style of music, you may find a use for having it cranked with that regard, but you have that control if you wanted to use it that way, just to give you a heads up. Putting that back to its place. Now let's go on over to the shape. And what the shape does is pretty much, I'd say it's self-explanatory, where you can control the shape of the equator line or that threshold line. If you would like to give more precedent processing wise to the top end of the mix versus the low end of the mix, you can do that using the shape. Let's crank the shape a bit so we can see it, exaggerate it. And within the shape, what you can do is you can change the curves that are here, or the algorithms, as I've been constantly saying. You have flat, which is self-explanatory. It leaves a flat line. So it has this line completely flat, meaning that everything is basically crossing the threshold, or a processing crossing the threshold at the same exact spot when it comes to things. Then you have pink, which is remnant of things like pink noise as far as a curve, letting you have more energy in the low end and attacking more stuff or giving a lower threshold to the mids and the top end of the mix. This is very, very remnant of pink noise as far as a curve is concerned, so keep that in mind. Flat reminds me a lot of white noise, being that all the frequencies in the range of human hearing are distributed equally. But pink noise, like pink noise, or the pink curve like this, is giving a little bit more energy, or kind of leaving alone more of the low end and letting you, or allowing more of that low end to flow and be unbothered. So keep that in mind. As you can see, pretty much if you look at the pink curve, you can clearly see that the low end is more unbothered in that regard. Granted, low end has a lot more energy in a lot of modern day music, but you can decide with pink to say, hey, I want you to bother less of it because I know that there's more amplitude down there. So once again, you coloring your sound and deciding for yourself what that is to sound like as far as your mix. And then we have warm, which you can see is cutting more of those high end frequencies, bothering less of the low end, and deciding for you kind of that sonic characteristic of a more warmer sound, which to me personally, if I cut more top end or higher frequencies, I'm gonna naturally start to probably feel like the sound itself gets a little bit warmer because I'm cutting those top end frequencies. So these are the three curves that's in here that you can manipulate with the shape. Keep that in mind. Now, with you picking which algorithm or which curve you want to use within the plugin, understand that the shape parameter allows you to accept or decide if you want more of that curve accentuated as far as pink or warm or just flat in general, or less. So if I want more of an exaggerated curve, then obviously go to the right. If I want less of the curve to be exaggerated, I'll go to the left. Simple. Personally, I like pink. For the style of music that I do, pink is pretty good for me. Cool. Because I like the low end to bang. So now if we move on over, this parameter, which I've showed you a bunch of times already, this is the threshold, or this is the knob that we're using to control the equator line. Basically, the higher it is, the less processing is going to occur. The lower it is, the more processing that's going to occur. Super self-explanatory, nothing crazy there to understand, but just know that's what that does. To the right side of this, I have and I've always called this the delta button, but basically this button is allowing you to hear what equator is taking away or processing. So you can switch back and forth to hear what's happening within equator and what's and what it was before. Let's exaggerate it just a bit, and then let's hit the delta button to see what processing is actually taking place by pressing this actual button.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa, I'm learning every line. No complaining. No, I'm walking by you.
So basically, equator is allowing me to hear what it's taking away and what is being processed versus the unprocessed signal, or versus the total signal in general. So I'm getting the chance to hear what is being taken away versus the actual fully processed sound with those things together. Keep that in mind. Okay, now we move on over here to tilt. And what the tilt is allowing me to do is, it's allowing me to decide if I want to give more precedence to the low end or more precedence to the high end. It's letting me decide if I want more processing to occur to the lower frequencies or more processing to occur on the higher frequencies. Let me just show you what it looks like on the GUI, and I bet you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. So if I turn the tilt more this way, what is this saying? This is basically giving more processing with the equator line happening at the top end or mid-range of the spectrum. And then if I turn it this way, you'll see me giving more processing to the low end of the spectrum. So once again, on top of using the shape knob, you can also use the tilt knob to exaggerate things even more if you feel like I really want to attack more of the mid-range stuff versus what I'm attacking of the low end stuff or the upper mids or the high end of things. So you can use this tilt line to kind of decide where you want more of that processing. I'll show you what it sounds like.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa, I'm learning every line. No complaining. No, I'm walking by your side. Keep me.
So you can see when I have it one way, it's attacking more of the higher frequencies. When I have it another way, it's attacking more of the low end frequencies. You can decide what you want the tone of the shaping to sound like, which to me is everything. That's really affecting the tone of how you're deciding, you know, you want to dial in your mix or your sound source. Because remember, you can use this on individual elements. Really cool. A lot of functionality, a lot of different parameters to dial in exactly what you're looking for. If you want an instrument or sound source to sound warmer, you can create that within the Equator, and you can kind of control things while you're trying to create that sonic characteristic or that tone. Really cool. I'm not lying to you. The other thing I want to show you, and this is getting a little bit more into a, how can I say, a more deeper side of the plugin. I'm going to hit this crossover button, like so. And what this crossover button is allowing me to do is, it's allowing me to fine tune things even more within the Equator plugin. Basically, what I can do is, I can come on over to here within any range that I want, like a multi-band, right? And I can move it, right? I can decide what frequency range I want to affect. Let's say, for instance, I want to affect this frequency range. With me taking this particular slider and going up, I am applying and saying to Equator, hey, in this particular range, I want you to apply less processing. I want less processing or less intensity of processing in this particular range. Although the curve with the Equator line is like this, I can also dial in how much I want as far as the processing to be there as far as everything is concerned. So it's allowed me to fine tune even further how I want to attack specific frequency ranges in the entire sound source. So for instance, let's take this particular thing right here, this slider, which is between 2000 and let's say, what is this, 8000, and let's take it all the way up. When I take it all the way up, basically, I'm gonna get no processing occurring to this range, but only to the other ranges there. Check this out.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa, I'm learning every line, no complaining. No, I'm walking by your side. Keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time.
So you can see and hear that when I have it all the way up as far as the slider, you notice that there is less or no processing. When I take it and pull it down more, now I'm getting more intensity, more processing happening to the actual frequency range. So with that being said, if you were the type of person and saying to yourself, look, I really don't want you to touch none of my low end at all, but I love this curve and I kind of just want you to attack those low mids and upper mids and high end, then I can go on over to the low end and I can take this, push it all the way up and get no processing occurring to that low end. Let's try it right quick.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying it. Whoa, I'm learning every line, no complaining. No, I'm walking by your side.
So you can see that difference or hear that difference for the most part, where if I have it cranked all the way down, I get more processing, have it up, I get less. But I can still maintain that curve as far as what I like, as far as the processing happening and things of that nature. The other thing I want to show you within the crossover, or you don't even need to use a crossover for that, but you can also use it like a traditional EQ in the sense of, if I feel like, hey, I know at the 200 hertz range, I'm getting a lot of garbage, things that I really don't want. I can literally create this node right here, which let me get out the way. And I can literally emphasize on a very specific frequency range that is bothering me. So when I'm taking this stuff out or pulling this down, I am getting rid of that frequency or applying more processing to that frequency. So I can get really specific with how I want Kerr's Equator to actually process signal and things of that nature. So yes, you can look at it as a traditional EQ as well, in the sense of going to specific frequency ranges that are bothering you and asking it to get rid of more of that, apply more processing to the specific frequency range that I'm actually applying it to as far as where I'm depicting things. So that's there too with it, which I thought was really interesting to have that on top of just being able to kind of have a one curve kind of deciding for you everything. You can hone in on it as well. Cool. Let's come out of the crossover. Let's actually go to a factory default. Boom. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the advanced controls like so. Here are the advanced controls. Going to move the crossover out the way. And with the advanced controls, a few new things kind of pop up at the bottom. One in particular is attack and release. Now, attack and release should be pretty self-explanatory, but nonetheless, When it comes to attack and release, you're deciding how soon or how quickly do you want the processing to occur for attack. Release is how long it takes for that processing to release or basically hold the actual processing. This can literally shape the overall tone and sound of the actual sound source that you have, or your mix, or whatever you have it on. So be wary of that. If you feel like you want that processing to grab things quicker, then of course, speed up the attack. If you want things to hold that sound a bit more, then turn up the release, which makes it a bit slower. Decide for yourself. Think of it just like compression in that regard. Completely can alter the sound of the actual sound source. Next, we have precision. Now, to me, and I'll be honest, I'll relate it to something. Precision reminds me a lot of sharpness when it comes to Soothe 2. On Soothe 2, the sharpness being lower gave me more broader cuts. With the sharpness higher, it gave me more precise cuts, more tiny cuts that were happening within the actual resonant suppression. Now, for me personally, I'm a bigger fan, massively, of broader cuts when it comes to this type of plugin. I'm not that big of a fan of the sharper kind of cuts because I feel like I start to get artifacts or comb filtering in that regard when there's so many frequencies kind of cutting these very small and fine things. To each his own, but that is something I want to throw out to you as far as phase and things of that nature when messing with EQ, and being careful with having so many small, minute changes that are occurring all at once and following those quote unquote problems or resonance. I'm a bigger fan of a lower precision to me because I just like broader EQ moves as opposed to more surgical ones happening all at once, like a bunch of them. So just putting that in the back of your mind with the precision. On the right hand side, we have this button that actually is related to tilt in general. So let me just turn up the curve right quick, just create a little curve. And now with the tilt frequency, allows you to kind of control and manipulate is, let's say for instance, I have my tilt more this way, but I'm like, I wish that the tilt kind of started a little bit more to the lower mids. Well, what you could do is you could take the tilt frequency and decide for yourself where you want that curve to occur, or where you want, or how you want to actually shape the actual slope or curve of the actual curve itself. So when I'm moving this up and down, you can clearly see that the actual midpoint of that tilt frequency is starting to change. Where if I move it more up here, then it's like backing off on the high end or upper mids as far as that equator line. So you can use the tilt frequency once again as a tool to kind of dial in exactly what you want to attack or go after, like so. Cool. So that's there. The other thing we have here is the curve smooth. I'll explain that in a second, but let me just go through the limiter and auto makeup, and then we'll go right to this curve smooth because it's really important. Right here, you have a limiter, which is helping things to not exceed 0. I also made sure in Axe Waves, is this on all the time? When I put this plugin on, is a limiter literally on my sound source all the time? What they told me is this limiter is only engaged when it does need to, or when something is sliding past that threshold as far as 0. So it just helps, and it's just a safety mechanism to help kind of catch things. If I'm not mistaken, it is relative to the L2 limiter, if I'm not mistaken, as far as what kind of limiting is happening when it does pass 0. But it's not altering the sound as far as when things are not needing the limiter. That was big for me. That was a question that I was like, hey, I really want to know about, and I think that's important to note and know about for all my super audiophiles out there. Auto makeup, self-explanatory. As you're applying this processing, it's also making sure it's matching and giving you the same kind of input, kind of loudness from the input signal that you had previously. That's important, to be honest. I just leave this on because I do want to compensate for that volume that I'm quote unquote losing or taking away as I'm using the resonant suppression. Cool. Now, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take this off of my mix bus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Curves Equator on my vocal now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you kind of what this curve smooth does for the most part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this learn function. And what the learn function is going to do is it's going to create a curve based on my sound source. When it listens to my sound source, it's going to choose a curve. It's going to decide where there is the most resonance or energy and give more precedent to that, meaning the equator line will probably be a little bit lower in that place where it's just catching that stuff. So it's going to detect that resonance, and then it's going to give me a curve that basically accentuates that, or excuse me, or cuts those frequencies for me. So it's going to create a curve that is literally designed for my actual sound source. Think about it. If the low mids in my vocal sound are much higher than the high end in my high end sound of the vocal, then what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, well, I want the resonance to not be super aggressive here. I want it to be tasteful. So I'm going to turn up the equator line a little bit more because there's more volume here, and try to catch those things tastefully, as opposed to, well, this stuff down here in this frequency range is pretty low. So what is it going to do? It's going to bring the threshold down until it's catching that stuff. So you're going to see a line that literally kind of mimics the sonic characteristics of the actual sound source. So let's try it with the vocal sound. I'm going to solo it. Let's press play, and then I'll hit learn.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying, whoa, I'm learning every line.
So like I told you, you can see that it's moving the equator line a little further up when it comes to the low mid energy, because there is a lot more of this particular range occurring in the actual sound source. So when I pull it down, I'm getting a more unified kind of sound of resonant suppression, now that it kind of mapped out and said, well, there's a lot here, so move the equator line up a bit, and oh, we need to turn the threshold down here more so that we can actually get processing to occur. So now that we've done that, let's start to bring the threshold down, and it'll bring it down nice and unified with my curve in order to attack those frequencies and get rid of some of that resonance. Let's try it.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying, whoa, I'm learning every line. No complaining, no, I'm walking by your side. Keep me waiting.
Now let's listen to it without the actual reverb sound, so you can get an even clearer picture of what's happening without first.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting. Whoa, it's worth it every time. Keep me saying, whoa, I'm learning every line. No complaining, no, I'm walking by your side. Keep me waiting.
So it sounds really cool, really natural sounding. It doesn't sound too aggressive. I can actually hear that there is some harmonics as far as harshness that I was hearing in the vocal before that now I feel like are a little bit more tame. I feel like the low mids are just a little bit more tame. Things feel very tasteful as far as what it got rid of. It didn't feel like this massive kind of alteration to the actual sonic characteristics of the vocal sound. It didn't feel like it got extremely bright or extremely boomy. It just kind of cleaned things up and got more control on the dynamics of the actual sound, which is very interesting if anyone can pick up on kind of what I'm trying to explain. Now, with that being said, remember I was talking about the curve smooth. Now, what does the curve smooth do? Say, for instance, you're saying to yourself, hey, this curve is pretty jagged. I want it to be a little bit more smoother in that regard. What I can do is click curve smooth, and now as I move it, you can see the curve gets a little bit more smoother, a little bit more broad as far as the decision that it made overall as far as the curve. If I put it more here, the curve gets a little bit more precise. As you can see, this dip right here at around that 320 hertz range. Now when I put the curve smooth up, kind of smooths that out, kind of decides to say, okay, well, I'm gonna take all this stuff and kind of just average it out, if that makes any sense, and smooth it. So once again, you can decide for yourself if you want to smooth the curve or if you want to make the curve a little bit more jagged or just more detailed in that regard. That's all the curve smooth does, for the most part. Okay, the very last thing I want to show you, this is the track spacer thing that I was telling you about. In track spacer, a lot of times what I would do is I would take the vocal and the instruments, for instance. I'd create a sidechain where anytime all the music heard this particular vocal sound, I said, get out of the way. Tastefully get out of the way. I can do that in Equator in a really cool way. And that's why I feel like a lot of people that may be getting overlooked, but this is a really cool feature to do and try when it comes to things masking each other or frequencies clashing with each other. But check out the way that Equator does it. Check this out. So right here on this side, I have all my instruments, all my music feeding this particular bus. So this is my music.
Don't you waste it.
Cool. So that is my music. Now I'm saying to myself, when the vocal plays with it, which I'm going to turn Kerr's equator off of the vocal, let's hear what that relationship sounds like.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time, keep me saying, whoa.
So not too bad of a clash, but what if we could make it better and really get it more out of the way of the music? And if I do that, I could probably turn the music up even more because there's less competition happening with the entire sound between those two. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn up the music a little bit more. Turn it up about, let's say, 3 dB. Let's listen to it now.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time, keep me saying, whoa. I'm learning every line.
So when I'm listening to that, I'm getting a little bit of competition now that I've intensified the entire music section in general. So what I'm gonna do is this. I'm going to create a sidechain within the equator, right? With the music on. And I'm gonna show you how I set it up. I'm gonna take my lead vocal. I'm going to set up a sidechain that I've deemed and called a send, called vocal sidechain. I'm gonna go to equator, and every DAW is different, but nonetheless, if you know how to set up a sidechain, set up a sidechain. I'm gonna set up my sidechain here. So now equator is listening to my lead vocal sound, right? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit this button. Now that I've hit this button, I've engaged and enacted my sidechain. So now equator is literally listening to sound coming from my vocal. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to hit the learn function. When I hit the learn function, equator is going to create a curve that is very remnant and helps me to unmask frequencies in that between that vocal sound and that music. So once again, equator is going to create this inverse curve that is going to help get those instruments out of the way of that sidechain or that vocal. Check this out.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time, keep me saying, whoa. I'm learning every line, no complaining, no. I'm walking by your side.
Okay, so now what we're gonna do is let's bypass this back and forth and listen to the processing before and after, seeing how it attempted to get those vocals out of the way of the instruments, creating less of a clash. Before.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time, keep me saying, whoa. I'm learning every line, no complaining, no. I'm walking by your side, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time.
So equator is showing me that a lot of the clash was happening in that low mid section. Thus you see and can obviously analyze that. That's where it's giving a lot more precedent to the actual processing as far as getting that out of the way of the vocal sound. Now granted, if I love that sound and I'm saying, okay, this is the curve, yeah, that's getting rid of that stuff in that clash, then I can even apply more processing by obviously bringing the threshold down or the equator down to say, no, get rid of even more. Or I can say, wait, I like it, but back off a little bit and doing it that way as well. The last thing that I want to show you about it is I can hit this rider button. And basically when I hit the rider button is really listening to the intensity of the sidechain. And it's applying and using the intensity of the sidechain to decide how much processing occurs and stuff like that. So if I hit rider, right? Like so, let's apply a decent amount of processing. If I go to the vocal sidechain aux, right, and I decrease the amount of intensity that's going into the sidechain, it's going to decrease the amount of processing that is occurring on it as well. So now you can even have it dynamically deciding how much processing to let happen depending on how loud or how much amplitude is feeding into the actual sidechain. Check this out. So as I turn this particular send down, you should notice that you'll see less processing starting to occur as I do it. And if I turn it up, you'll see more processing happening as I do it with hitting the rider function. Check this out.
Don't you waste it, so I say, keep me waiting, whoa. It's worth it every time, keep me saying, whoa. I'm learning every line, no complaining, no. I'm walking by your side, keep me waiting, whoa.
So with the writer function, it allows you to also be able to control the dynamics as far as how much processing is occurring based on dynamics. Is there a lot of that particular vocal sound or sound source coming into the sidechain? Okay, let's apply more processing. Is there less? Let's apply less processing. So that is Curve's Equator. I think it could add a lot of value to a lot of people's workflow. I will be using this, and I'll also give you my opinion more and more over the course of time. But I just wanted to break down the plugin, show you what it did from start to finish, and just give you an idea of what it sounded like. And perhaps maybe if you could probably, like I said, use it in your workflow. Again, Waves did sponsor this video, and I want to be very clear on it, but I would not have shown you the plugin at all if I felt like it didn't add any value to, you know, your workflow, or just didn't, something that I just didn't feel like just added any value to us. I think this is to be honest, an evolution of EQ. I think it could be really special for some people. And like I said, draw your own conclusions, make your own opinion about the plugin. And if you like it, I'll leave a link in the description below nonetheless. But I hope you have a better understanding of the plugin, which is my entire goal of this actual video. And would love to hear some more of your comments, questions, and concerns. Just let me know. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. This was my breakdown of Waves Curve's Equator, which there are more plugins coming out in this line, which I'm interested in as well. And if you want me to check those out, let me know when they come out. Just like y'all let me know for this one. Trust me, a lot of y'all hit me about this one, asking for it. So here we are. But yeah, hope you enjoyed. And until next time, y'all.